So, hello everyone, and today I would like to explain how reality is perceived by humans, right? And there are certain categories um, that are the preconditions for every other category, and therefore, because something is a precondition, it means it's an axiom, right? So, a precondition for everything else is an axiom. So, what is a precondition and what is an axiom? It means it can't be questioned, right? It means that the axiom is the necessity, right? So these preconditional categories are necessities and their derivatives are contingent. What I mean is that when you have a fundamental category that everything else depends on, it means that the fundamental category is independently true and it's a necessity. Every other category that is dependent on those fundamental categories, those subordinate categories are, well, dependent. They're contingent in that they're not necessary, right? But there are certain categories that are necessary. And these necessary categories are the preconditions for human consciousness, right? They are the axioms of human consciousness. And while we cannot fully explain them in terms of, language, or at least within, a reasonable time frame, like maybe if I had like a 50-hour lecture, I could sort of explain these fundamental categories, right? But I can't do it in this short span of time. And so these categories, sorry, I just got a text. All right, so apparently there's some problem with the water supply, the water provision. So, like last night I was trying to take a shower and there was no warm water. Like the water was completely cold, and so the landlord told me that's fixed now. That's good. So I'll check later to see if I can actually have access to warm water in the shower. But anyway, so as I was saying, right, so these ideas of there being fundamental categories that precede conscious human cognition, right? There's these pre-conscious, pre-rational categories. There's these a priori categories that all of perceived existence depends upon, right? This is an idea that I obtained from Jordan Peterson, right? So from his book Maps of Meaning, especially, right? So Jordan Peterson's idea of how the human consciousness must understand reality through the categories of order and chaos, femininity and masculinity, being connected with those categories, right? So okay, I'm gonna illustrate what I mean. So here is the category of is this a circle? Yeah, there we go. The category of, sorry, I gotta make this look a bit better. Okay. So this is the category of of order, and this is the category of right. So here's the category of chaos, and here's the category of what's the word? Yeah, masculinity. There you go. And here's the category of femininity, right? Right. So let's give some brief definitions, right? So what is order? Order is its structure, meaning, and actuality, right? It's the status quo, right? It's convention. You could say it's right? What is chaos? Chaos is indeterminate potential, right? It's the primordial energy, right, that creates the universe. It's the primordial energy prior to the existence of the universe, right? I'm not sure. I don't think I need to say that, but you get the point. Indeterminate potential, right? It's the state of nature. Chaos is like nature, right? And order is like civilization, right? And what is masculinity? Well, masculinity is basically order, and femininity is chaos, right? So masculinity, you could say, is the superordinate principle. Femininity is the subordinate principle, right? So masculinity represents authority. Femininity represents like subordinates, right? So like what's the word? You could say submissiveness, but I suppose, okay, for a lack of a better word, I'll use the word submissiveness, even though that might not be accurate. Now, what else? Right, femininity represents, right, mystery, right, just as chaos does, right? And masculinity represents right, assertion, right? So mystery is like the opposite of assertion, right? So and the human consciousness is in the middle of these four categories, right? So here is the human consciousness. And so what is this? What does any of this actually mean? Well, this is something that Jordan Peterson has tried to explain throughout his entire career. And, this is why, so I'm very ambivalent about Jordan Peterson. Because on one hand, Jordan Peterson is the greatest philosopher of our era. On the other hand, he's the worst philosopher of our era. Right? Why is he the greatest philosopher? Because he realized that human beings understood the world in terms of these fictional categories that are irreducible. So we can't really explain why the human brain must understand reality the way that it does. But Jordan Peterson was able to identify that, yes, we do understand the world in terms of fictional metaphors, and the most fundamental metaphors are religious truths that we cannot explain away and we cannot articulate rationally. Right, so that's why he's the greatest philosopher, because he realized, oh, hold on, there's a priori structures of human cognition itself that cannot be explained by human cognition. Human reason has a limit. Human reason cannot understand the preconditions of human consciousness. Right, so in other words, okay, you have to put this in plain English terms. Human understanding cannot understand why human understanding understands. Right? We cannot understand the basis of human understanding. Right? And there's definitely always an anthropomorphic bias to our understanding, right? There's a human bias to human understanding because we are biological creatures, so we must understand reality in terms of masculinity and femininity. But we also must understand reality in terms of order and chaos because we are also rational actors in reality, meaning that we have goals, right? We engage in goal-striving behavior. So only the categories of order and chaos allow us to navigate reality so that we can achieve goals, right? Because without a category of order, we don't know what a structure is, and we won't be able to, make a plan or be able to understand meaning and like a structure, right? And without a concept of chaos, then we won't be able to navigate uncertainty and be able to, deal with obstacles and overcome adversities, right? So we need all these 4 categories, right? We need the categories of gender, masculinity, and femininity because our biological brain presupposes it, right? You can't really erase these categories from human cognition. And we need the categories of order and chaos because they permit us to make sense of the world, right? A world with only chaos would have no meaning. A world with only chaos cannot be navigated rationally, and you couldn't really make decisions in this world. You couldn't even have a sense of self or a sense of temporal continuity in a pure world of chaos because there wouldn't be any order. You wouldn't understand what's going on. There would just be continuous change that overwhelms your sense perception, right? And we need order to understand the world because without order, there's no meaning. And but we do need chaos as well because without chaos, then order will sort of solidify and like become an overwhelming constraint on our ability to understand reality, right? So without chaos, you basically just have authoritarianism, right? So the cognitive equivalent of authoritarianism and totalitarianism is the same as the political equivalent, right? It's just that what happens outside of our brain is just a macrocosm of what happens inside of our brain, right? So order, when it becomes too excessive, is authoritarianism, right? Chaos, when it becomes too excessive, is barbarism and warfare, right? So you need a balance of order and chaos, or you can't understand reality. You need a balance of masculinity and femininity, right? Because order and masculinity are, like categories which are like dependent on each other for us to understand them. Same with chaos and femininity. And that's why human consciousness exists at the convergence point between order, chaos, masculinity, and femininity, right? So human consciousness is derived from these 4 categories, right? So I was explaining how Jordan Peterson was a genius because he was able to understand all of this and put it in his book, Maps of Meaning. And a lot of these are, I suppose, Jungian archetypes, right? I never studied Jung. I only studied Jordan Peterson, so I don't know about Jung. I'm sure he had something to do with these archetypes. Now, so I said Jordan Peterson's a genius. He's the best philosopher of our era. Why is he also the worst philosopher? Why is he the worst philosopher? Because he needs a paragraph to understand a sentence or explain a sentence. He needs a book to explain a paragraph, right? Jordan Peterson engages in these very verbose monologues where you don't understand what he's saying, where you don't even know if Jordan Peterson understands Jordan Peterson. And the issue is, you ask him a question, he starts reciting the Old Testament, right? Or like you try to ask him like, did this actually happen? Did Jesus actually resurrect? Or you ask him some basic theological question and he can't answer you because he's looking at it from multiple levels of analysis at once, right? And so it's very difficult to understand Jordan Peterson unless you read his book, Maps of Meaning, but you might not understand that either, right? So, and then it's like, okay, he keeps talking about how you need to be aligned with the hero myth, you need to be aligned with the pattern of the logos, and you need to be a courageous hero, blah, 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 right? But the problem is then he will go on this very impressive monologue, and then he will end up in a hospital bed. He will end up in a coma because he took too many drugs, or he'll have all these health issues, and he's collapsing, and like, he can't even eat an olive, right? Because if he eats an olive instead of his steak diet, right, he eats one olive and now he, contracts some terrible illness and he can't even sit down, right? So it's like on one hand, Jordan Peterson's a genius. On the other hand, Jordan Peterson, it's really deranged, right? There's something very wrong with this guy. But that's how it is with these kind of intellectuals, right? You're gonna get the best and the worst of them. Right. So if you just ignore Jordan Peterson's personality and you just stick to his ideas, he's actually a genius. The problem with his ideas is that they actually can't be articulated rationally, right? So I'm trying my best here, but I can't. So, and I think, okay, to give credit to Jordan Peterson, perhaps the reason for his mental illness and perhaps the reason that he wasn't able to articulate the ideas he had is because his ideas can't be articulated, right? Because the concepts of order, chaos, masculinity, and femininity are pre-rational, pre-conscious, and they precede our understanding of existence, right? So if anything, order, chaos, masculinity, and femininity, these are the 4 categories that make all of perceived existence existent to the human consciousness, right? So we have to understand these categories exist, even if we can't really understand these categories, right? So that's what it is, right? And so literally every single story requires these categories, right? Every anthropomorphic story, so every human story, every human culture, every human idea, every human concept, every human civilization is dependent on these concepts, right? Every myth, right? Every narrative and every theory, every set of ideas, every framework that you have ultimately can be reduced to these categories, right? Order, chaos, masculinity, and femininity, right? Think of these as the 4 axioms of perceived existence. Now, it's good to understand these ideas because a lot of people, they say that they're not philosophical, right? Actually, when we try to speak about philosophy to a lot of people, we try to tell them about the meaning of life, right? Or you tell them about these deep issues like what even is morality? Like, what is metaphysics? Does free will actually exist, right? Does God exist, right? You ask them very deep questions. Eventually they will run away, right? So what will happen is, okay, you try to speak to someone about a deep philosophical concept, and then he will conveniently have a business meeting in the next 5 minutes, and he has to leave, or like he has to leave because I don't know, his wife got pregnant, and he has to go, or like, oh, okay, like a plane just crashed, or like, I don't know, something happens, and now he has to leave the conversation, right? It's very convenient when you try to bring up philosophy and nobody's interested. But the problem is, if you don't think about these issues, then you would just be a slave to ideas anyways, right? So humans are a slave to ideas, right? So humans are different from every other animal, whereas most animals are slaves to their immediate desires, to their immediate impulses, to emotions and biological instincts. Humans have all of that. Yes, humans have the biological instincts. We also have the immediate desires and the visceral sort of primordial drives, right? We have those same things as animals, but we also have a rational faculty, right? We can understand concepts, which are abstractions from reality, right? And So humans are a slave to these abstractions. Humans are a slave to ideas. And if you don't understand what ideas you are a slave to, when you don't understand what ideas underlie and determine your behavior, we don't even know what ideas are causing you to behave the way you do and think the way you do. We don't understand these ideas. I don't know. It seems like a very passive existence. It seems like doesn't seem very ideal. So you want understanding, right? And what I tried to give you this understanding, right? So these are the 4 categories of existence, right? These are the 4 axioms of existence. And with these 4 axioms, you can create an infinite number of combinations through these 4 ideational axioms. And so you can create every archetype, every concept, every category, every narrative. You can create anything in existence from human consciousness, right? So anything that can exist in human consciousness, anything that can understand, anything that can exist within the anthropomorphic understanding of reality, right? Anything that you can think of can be created or is a derivative of these 4 categories, right? So this category is called order, right? Order is concomitant with masculinity, and it's tied to masculinity. They're symbolically connected, right? So these ideas are all symbols. Order means structure, meaning, actuality, limitation, right? Status quo, the convention, right? Yeah, that's limitation. And limitless possibility, right? And so, okay, chaos implies. So order is all about structure. It's about meaning. It's about limitation. It's about convention. It's about authority. It's about hierarchy, right? Order is about hierarchy. It's about a rational arrangement, right, of reality. Rational arrangement of reality. What does rational mean? It means you can understand it, right? There's some logic or math behind it, right? And so, what is masculinity? Masculinity is symbolically linked with order, and it's the superordinate principle of the cosmos, right? It denotes authority, it denotes assertiveness, dominance, right? But masculinity is associated with domination. Chaos denotes limitless possibility, the state of nature, right? Ambivalence, right? So like anything's possible. So what's going to happen, right? There's some uncertainty with chaos, right? And chaos is also tied to the indeterminate potential and the primordial chaos, right? The primordial energy that the masculine ordering principle uses to create reality, right? And so femininity is like the subordinate principle to masculinity, right? It denotes submissiveness, mystery, right? It's very hard to explain what femininity really is, right? And so these four categories, they can only be explained in terms of their opposites, right? So order can only be explained in terms of chaos. Masculinity can only be explained in terms of femininity. And if you try to explain these concepts in terms of themselves, right? If you try to explain order in terms of order, then you're not going to understand. Like, so what is order? We don't know, right? What does it mean? What does chaos actually mean, right? What does masculinity and femininity mean? What do they mean? Nobody knows. They can only be understood in terms of their opposites, right? So order can only be understood if it's compared to chaos. Femininity can only be understood if it is in contrast with masculinity, right? So these are the four categories that every fiction depends upon, and we only understand reality through fictions, right? These are the most foundational fictions. Now we understand that everything in reality is a fiction. Okay, so there's a hierarchy of fictions, right? There's a hierarchy of fictions. Remember, we can only understand reality through fictions, right? What is order? What is chaos? What is femininity? What is masculinity? These are all fictions that the human brain must make in order to understand reality, right? Because the reason we understand reality through feminine and masculine forces is because we have biological biases. The reason we must understand reality through chaos and order is because we engage in purposeful behavior. We engage in goal-directed activity, which requires the concepts of chaos to denote uncertainty, and we require the concept of order to designate, a sense of certainty, a sense of a status quo, right? So, so we understand reality through fictions. Now, by fiction, I mean something that can't be rationally explained, right? Yeah, so now a hierarchy of fictions, right? So what is at the bottom of the hierarchy? It's like trivial facts, right? Right? Like how many oxygen molecules are in the room, right? Right. What color is the shirt? Right. Like what is the how many pieces of wood are in a house, right? Or how many leaves are on a tree, right? Right, so these are trivial facts. So there's a hierarchy of fictions that we use to understand the world, and these are just the most trivial ones, right? And oftentimes science is what deals with the most trivial facts. So really, science is the least real out of all the fictions, right? So because everything in reality is a fiction, since you don't have epistemic certainty, right? So often science is the most trivial of all fictions, right? Because it's just dealing with these most pedantic facts like, oh, how many neurons are in the brain? Ooh, how many atoms are in the room? Like these are trivial facts, right? And you might say, oh, not everything is a fiction, right? There are objective truths, okay? Well, let me tell you. So how can there be non-fiction ideas, right? How can there be real ideas, right? Well, think about what people say when they say something is not fictional, i.e., when they say something is non-fictional and therefore true, right? They say something's rational, right? But what can rationality actually give you? Rationality can only give you A equals A tautology, right? A self-reference. Sorry, my keyboard's bugging. Okay, so look. So rationality can only give you self-referential information and a tautology, like A equals A, 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2. These are tautologies. Alone, like with this information alone, you can't do anything with rationality. So rationality alone is impotent and cannot provide any useful information. What about empiricism, right? But empiricism is just a data set, right? So like, let's say you go to the park every day, okay? So you have a memory of the park. You know how many trees are in the park. You know how many blades of grass are in the park. You know how much sand is on the playground. You know, you know how tall the trees are in the park, right? You know the size of the park, like how many acres. You know how many apples are on the apple tree of the park, right? But that's a data set. So how does data become knowledge, right? How does a passive data set, which is just a set of data points, right? It's just a set of facts. How does that become knowledge? How does memory become knowledge that will allow you to engage in purposeful behavior, right? How does random facts become knowledge that you can actually put into propositions and that you can actually create things in reality with? Like, how does empirical data become knowledge that we can store into our head and actually use for our actions and interactions, right? So empiricism alone is useless, right? All you get is a set of facts, right? And you memorize a set of facts. So what? You can't do anything with just the facts, right? So really, we understand reality through intuitions, right? Through intuition. And intuition is something that can't really be explained, but it's basically value judgments, right? So you can't understand what intuitions fully are because intuition is the precondition of rationality, right? But intuition is value judgments, right? And we understand reality through intuitive means, which means we understand reality through fictions, right? And because I already explained that rationality alone is useless, is epistemically impotent, likewise, empiricism alone is also epistemically impotent, right? So we can only understand reality through fictions fundamentally. Now, let's look at the hierarchy of fictions. Let's go back, right? So the trivial facts are at the bottom. Next is propaganda, right? Propaganda, it's, brute force propositions that support power, right? So propaganda is the second weakest kind of fiction, right? Because it's not very compelling in itself, right? It simply supports whatever political agenda, whatever tyrants happen to be in charge, right? It's just propaganda, right? It's not very nuanced. It's not very creative. It's not very interesting. It's not brilliant, right? It's just propaganda. It's just brute force propositions, brute force infomercials and narratives that will just tell you what to do. Why? Why do you have to follow propaganda? Because the powerful people said so. And why should you follow power? Because they will kill you, right? They will kill you if you disagree. So propaganda doesn't have to be creative. It doesn't have to be interesting. It doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be brilliant. It doesn't have to be, something that your brain is very engaged with and finds very valuable and immersive, right? So propaganda doesn't have to be valuable because it's backed by raw power, right? And raw power will kill you, right? So propaganda's the second weakest kind of fiction. Now, above propaganda is great literature, right? I don't know. Think of like Shakespeare, um, Roald Dahl, I guess, and J.K. Rowling. I guess Dante. Right. I never read Dante. Okay, I never read Dante. I heard he's like this great poet. You know, I only heard of Dante from Professor Jang, right? The predictive history guy, right? Apparently he's like, so actually, maybe he goes on the category above. So maybe he doesn't go here. But okay, so look, I don't read fictional stories much, right? I don't engage in fictional literature that much. But I know that what a great work of literature will do is that it will provide an immersive and elaborate account of human experience, right? So all the highs and lows of human experience, all the differentiated aspects of how humans perceive the world, right? So great literature is always operating with the four categories aforementioned, right? So yeah, great literature is compelling, right? Because it shows you the extent and the gradients of human experience, right? It shows you the values and properties of human experience in a compressed format. That's why it's so engaging. That's why great literature is valuable, addictive, and it's a fundamental part of human culture, right? So great literature is the second most powerful kind of fiction, right? What is the most powerful kind of fiction? The most powerful kind of fiction is religious meta-narratives, right? Right, so the most fundamental truths are religious meta-narratives. Now, what is the criteria? What is the criteria to be higher up on the hierarchy of fictions, right? Criteria is, well, this is something Jordan Peterson talked about, right? This is something that Jordan Peterson said before, which is that the more so the more other narratives depend on a narrative, the more fundamental that narrative is, right? So Jordan Peterson, I think he was talking to Sam Harris, and he was saying, okay, how do you know a text is important? How do you know that a text is fundamentally true or significant in some way? Well, you know, because a text is more fundamental if more texts depend on it, right? So imagine you had a text, a narrative. Imagine you had a narrative that every other narrative was dependent upon for its meaning and its value, right? You couldn't make sense of the other narratives unless you understood the more fundamental narrative, at least subconsciously, right? So the narrative that all other narratives are dependent upon is called a meta-narrative, right? The meta-narrative is the underlying narrative, the axiomatic narrative, the overarching story, right? The overarching pattern that all other patterns depend upon, right? It's like the ancestor, right? Sorry, let me blow my nose. All right. So there appeared to be some kind of obstructive item within my nose. However, if I keep trying to, because I have these Q-tips here, I'm trying to remove whatever the uncomfortable item is within my nose. But the problem is, if I tamper with my nasal cavity too much, this could cause a nosebleed, and that is quite, it's a remarkable inconvenience actually. But yeah, so let me return to the point I was making. And actually, people are going to say, no, reality isn't just a set of fictions, right? And so, okay, let me be more clear, okay? So what I'm saying is that reality is a set of fictions, right? Perceived reality is a set of fiction. And why is reality a set of fictions? And so what is a fiction? A fiction is something that you cannot know for certain if it is true, right? So something is fictional if you can't know for certain if it is true, right? Think about Bigfoot, right? Do you know if it's true? Or maybe not, right? Think about aliens, right? Aliens and UFOs, flying saucers, right? These extraterrestrial Martian species. The American government is actually saying that maybe all of this is true, right? Maybe these conspiracy theories that these crazy people have, it's actually true. Maybe, right? But it's a fiction so far. Or even like the theory of evolution, right? The theory of human evolution, where you have spontaneous adaptation through environmental conditions or through niches and through competition for scarce resources, right? The Darwinian selection, right? You can say this is a fiction, right? This is a fiction because you can't know for certain it is true, right? Maybe intelligent design is true, right? You can say intelligent design is a fiction too, right? So anything that you're epistemically uncertain of is a fiction, right? So if you have epistemic uncertainty, right, there is a fiction, right? Now, what isn't a fiction? What can we know for certain? The only thing you can know for certain are tautologies, right? In other words, self-references, and that's what logic is, right? Logic is just tautologies, right? So people who say, I'm taking the stance of epistemic anti-realism, right? Or epistemic nihilism. Right? This is my stance I'm taking here, okay? And so epistemic realists, people who believe in objective knowledge, right? So what is the opposite? The opposite of this is objective knowledge, right? So people who believe there is objective knowledge, these imbeciles, right? These liars, these deceivers, these con men, right? These people are liars. They have false confidence, right? They are very insidious and pernicious kind of people, right? And so if you have objective knowledge, you're going to appeal to rationalism and empiricism, right? But I already explained that rationalism is just logic, right? And rationalism can only net you self-references, right? So all you can get from rationality alone is A equals A. It's a self-reference that doesn't provide any useful or interesting information. So, okay, but let's say you add empiricism, right? You combine rationalism and empiricism, and you make a predictive model, right? So I've already shown why rationality alone is epistemically impotent and useless, right? So someone who wants to argue for objective knowledge, he has to appeal to empiricism, right? So what does empiricism mean? What do they mean? They need to make a predictive model, okay? And this is really a pragmatic example, right? So really, predictive modeling is a pragmatic argument. It's based on Bayesian inference, right? Bayesian inference. What does Bayesian inference mean? It means you update your hypothesis of the world based on more information. So the more information you have, the more theoretically accurate your predictive model is. Okay, well, let's refute this, okay? So you have a predictive model. So you have a predictive model. Okay, so here's reality, right? Reality, right? What actually exists. And here's your predictive model of reality. Okay. Well, first of all, how do you know that your predictive model has contact with reality? This is just an assumption. How do you know that your predictive model is actually even modeling reality, right? Maybe it's modeling, like, for all you know, there might not be any contact, right? There might be no contact between your predictive model and reality. So maybe your predictive model is modeling something else entirely, or it's modeling itself, right? So maybe your predictive model isn't modeling what actually exists, reality, right? Maybe your predictive model isn't modeling reality or has any contact with reality. Maybe instead, your predictive model is modeling itself, or it's modeling some unrelated thing, right? So some simulation, some dream, some hallucination, some sophistry, right? Maybe your predictive model has no contact with reality, right? But let's say, okay, your predictive model is 99% certain, right? We could say 99. We could say whatever, right? Maybe it's 99.99999999999 between percent certain, right? 99.99999% certain. Okay, so it's not, you're 99.99999% certain that your predictive model is true, whatever that means. Okay. The problem is, how do you know your predictive model, right? How do you know you have contact with your predictive model? How do you know that you remember your predictive model, or even know that it exists, or know that it didn't change in your memory, or know that what you're perceiving is actually your predictive model and not just a model of that model, right? Not just a imitation or a false representation of your model. How do you know that you actually know what your model is saying, rather than just a simulation or something unrelated to the model, right? How do you know that you have contact with your model? So you need a predictive model of your predictive model, right? You need a predictive model of your predictive model to model reality. Right, so now you're 99% certain of your predictive. So now your predictive model of your predictive model is 99% certain of it, right? So you have a predictive model of your predictive models, right? So you have a predictive model of reality, and you have a predictive model of a predictive model, right? So here is a predictive model of a predictive model, but you need another predictive model because you don't actually understand this one. So you don't know for sure, right? You don't have certainty. You don't know. So you need a predictive model of a predictive model of a predictive model, right? So this goes into an infinite regress, right? And eventually you end up with like a borderline zero certainty, right? So it's gonna attenuate, right? The certainty rates will attenuate. So you have virtually zero certainty, right? Practically speaking, you have no certainty, right? You have no certainty. And this is the refutation of these people who are, ooh, we are rationalists. We're rationalistic. We're so rationalistic. We engage in empirical data analysis. Ooh, look at us. We're so rational. We have predictive models. We do Bayesian inference. Oh, look at me. Look at my knowledge. Look at the knowledge I have. Look at the objective knowledge. No, you don't have any knowledge. Don't come to me with your epistemic realism again, okay? Never assert again that you have certainty or that you have objective knowledge, okay? You guys are charlatans. You guys are fraudsters. You guys are liars. You guys are deceivers. Don't come to me with these arguments again. This is nothing. These are impotent arguments, and I have refuted them. Right? These are nothing arguments, and you still don't know. So now you're 0.0000% certain. Right? You're 0% certain. You're practically. You're 0.0000000000000 ad infinitum 1% certain, right? You're like, okay, you are 1/1,000,000th of 1% certain that you even know your predictive model, and you still don't even know if your predictive model has any contact with reality. Okay, you still don't know, right? So you don't even have. So you have 1/1,000,000th of 1% certainty in your predictive model, but you don't even know if that predictive model even correlates to or has a contact with reality, right? So don't come to me with your epistemic realism. Don't talk to me about empiricism and rationalism. You don't understand what you're talking about. Don't. All right. You need to be quiet and listen to me when I'm talking, right? Because I am actually a teacher. I am a superior philosopher to all of you. I have an understanding, right? So So basically everything is fiction, right? There's a hierarchy of fictions. And now what are the most fundamental fictions, right? The most fundamental fictions are the religious meta-narratives, right? So now let's look at the most fundamental meta-narratives, right? The most powerful meta-narratives so far. The ones that have affected the most human psyches, right? Right. For some reason, sorry, I'm trying to type and you press a key on the keyboard and it does not work. Right. That is very inconvenient. I don't know if is it my laptop? Hold on. Maybe it's my laptop, but maybe it's the program. Okay, so anyways. So religious meta-narratives. So the most significant religious meta-narratives, right? And these are, of course, Judaism, Christianity, right? Islam, and secular democracy, right? And so, yeah, secular democracy is the only competitor to these theistic frameworks, right? So, what are these religious narratives? They're the most fundamental truths, right? The most fundamental truths in perceived reality, right? Now, so what is secular democracy, right? Because the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. Secular democracy is basically worshipping the God of reason, right? The God of secular reason. So the secular democratic religion worships the God of secular reason, right? And what is the God of secular reason? It's the secular trinity, right? The leftist trinity, which is egalitarianism, moral universalism, and what? This is sorry. The text is bugging, bro. Holy shit. Okay, whoever like, I don't know. Like maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but this program is made by retards. Like I don't know why. Okay, worshiping the God of reason. The God of reason. What? What's it? Reason. Bro, I swear it's the S key. Hold on. The S key. No, my S key is bugged. Wait. What? It's working. Okay, it's working perfectly everywhere else, but it's just not working here sometimes. Worshipping the God of reason, and the God of reason is the leftist trinity, right? Which is egalitarianism, moral universalism, and democracy. Right? The leftist trinity. This is the secular, the most dominant secular ideology, right? This is the secular religion, right? And so, what is Judaism? Judaism is definitely an ethnocentric religion, right? I don't think anyone's gonna deny this, and it's nationalistic. At least some of its elements, right? I'm not saying all Judaists think a certain way, right? Some of it, but like what differentiates it from Christianity and Islam? What differentiates Judaism from other religions that are here is that they do value in particular a particular nation and a particular group of people, right? And so it's about these specific people, right? The Jews, right? So Judaism is generally speaking more ethnocentric and nationalistic than Christianity or Islam or secular democracy. So okay, sorry, I'm getting messaged. Yeah, it's very annoying when people just message me like out of the blue. Like I don't know. I don't know. It's just a bureaucracy of social interactions. Like okay, like some social interactions is like it's like people are forced. It's almost like you know people are forcing you to have your attention harvested now. It's like you have a limited amount of mental energy and people just steal it from you. It's like it's very coercive the way people behave. I mean, like it's very perfidious. And so, I mean, like, anyways. So, what I was saying, right? Um, but obviously, so I mean, yeah, we know what these religions are, so I'm not. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to rate these religions on 3 criteria, right? But I'm going to evaluate these religions on these 3 criteria. The first one is going to be motivational power, right? So how much the religion motivates you to sacrifice for it, right? So a religion is very powerful if it can motivate people to sacrifice their lives and their habits for it, right? So hold on, I'm gonna have to message someone because yeah, sorry. So yeah, someone was texting me. Um, well, I wish there was some way to auto reply to text without actually like even doing it. So like I would like for AI for Claude to be able to just generate a clone of myself so that he can respond to texts and calls on my behalf, right? Because it's very annoying having to do these things. I mean, it's just very pedantic, bureaucratic little things. Those are the things that I dislike the most about life, right? These pedantic little things, right? Like social interactions or like especially when like it's something so obvious. It's like someone's texting you or calling you about something so obvious. It's like, why are you even speaking to me? Why are you wasting my time? It's so annoying, right? Anyways, so motivational power, right? So motivational power just means like, okay, if you're willing to sacrifice your life for a religion, if you're willing to sacrifice more of your life and your items that you have for the religion, like, right? So the more you're willing to sacrifice for a religion, the more motivational power it has, right? The second is logical coherence, right? So does the religion make sense to the mind, right? This is obvious, right? We have limited mental energy, and humans like to find harmony in the concepts that they understand, right? So if a concept doesn't make sense, right, we tend to want to throw it away or not really respect it, right? And so, what's the third one? I'm going to check. I'm going to check my notes. Hold on. Oh, okay. I think it was actually explanatory power, right? Does the religion provide a specific um and compelling explanation of reality? Right. So we're going to evaluate these religions, right? The first we'll go with Judaism, right? So let's look at motivational power of Judaism. Very strong, right? Actually, we're gonna add a fourth criteria. Okay, I realize universality. Right. Can everyone participate in the religion? Right. Right. So let's look at Judaism, right? So the fourth criteria is universality. Can everyone participate in the religion? Right. I just repeat myself to make sure it's in the transcript. Now, so the first criteria is motivational power. So does Judaism have strong motivational power for its adherents? Well, yes, for the Jews especially, right? Because, you believe that you have a sacred contract with God, and that your nation is blessed, and some may even say the most blessed among all the nations, right? Israel, right? So yes, very strong motivational power for Judaism, right? And that's sort of what happens with a religion that is sometimes ethnocentric and nationalistic, right? It's going to be very motivational because you think, okay, I'm special. I'm better than other people, right? I'm better than other people. I am promised more rewards than other people because I have a special relationship with God, and He's going to reward me more, right? So that's Judaism definitely has strong motivational power, right? Logical coherence, generally speaking, yes, Judaism is quite logically coherent because they believe in one God, one monotheistic God, right? Hashem, right? And it's not like Christianity where it's often a lot of people believe in the Trinity. The Trinity is an incoherent concept. It's a square circle, right? It's unintelligible. It's a contradiction. So Judaism, at least it's just a monotheistic religion, so it makes sense, right? It's an explanation, right? And let's look at explanatory power. Does the religion provide a specific and compelling explanation of reality? I would say yes. Genesis provides a creation myth for reality, for the world, right? The Judaists have an eschatological script. They have an understanding of the world, right? They have all these shared stories in the Old Testament, the Torah, that allows them to understand human nature, politics, and cosmology, right? So they can understand reality through Judaism, right? It's pretty strong explanatory power. And while universality, can everyone participate in a religion, right? So now I'm not going to give Judaism the fourth one, right? Judaism lacks universality because well, not everyone can really be a Jew, or at least there's very excessive barriers of entry to Judaism compared to other religions. Like, so not everyone can be a Jew, which means not everyone can have that sacred covenant with God. So that's also why, like sometimes Judaists don't get along with everyone. Sometimes, and that's very controversial, right? That's very controversial. Obviously, this video is just for educational, satirical purposes, comedic purposes, right? But Judaists get into conflicts with other people all the time. People have oppressed them. They have genocided them. They have been evicted from their homes. They have been killed. They have been massacred, right? They have been oppressed by a lot of other people because they don't get along. And part of the reason why is because their religion is non-universal. It's particularist, right? Not everyone can be a Jew. And in a way, they feel that they have a sacred covenant with God that isn't the same as everyone else's, right? And so I would say Judaists lack that universality. And yeah, so it's also why often this is just a generalization, right? But often Jews will be in conflict with the Muslims, such as geopolitically and even militarily. Like, you see what's happening with the war between Israel, Iran, and Israel and Palestine, right? So like, these kind of conflicts, there's definitely religious elements to these conflicts, right? I'm not saying they're entirely religious. I'm just saying that there's definitely a tension and conflicts between Judaism and other religions, especially Islam, right? At least now, right? Right. Even though Islam and Judaism are monotheistic religions, and I'm pretty sure that they might even be worshiping the same God, right? So, anyways, so now let's evaluate Christianity. So let's look at the motivational power of Christianity. So how much does the religion motivate you to sacrifice for it? Well, there's very strong motivational power, actually. But very strong. So I'm going to give it 1+, right? It's very strong motivational power. Christianity has very strong motivational power because the story of Christ is arguably the most normatively motivational story ever. It's the most morally compelling story ever, right? Because in the story of Christ, right, in the Passion of Christ, the most innocent and benevolent person possible is tortured in the most cruel way possible, right? So this compression of the dichotomy between the ethically worst outcome and the ethically best outcome makes it a very inspiring story, because obviously it's a good story, right? There's a good ending to the story because, yes, Jesus gets crucified and tortured in the most abhorrent way possible, but he descends into hell, he defeats death and redeems souls from hell, and he flies up into heaven, he resurrects, right? So he completes the entire hero's journey. He successfully descends into chaos and overcomes adversity, and he brings back the sacred treasure and shares it with the community. And the sacred treasure is redemption of mankind, right? Redemption for the sins, forgiveness for the sins, right? And so there's so much motivational power in the story of Christ, right? It's like, wow, so this innocent person, he was healing the sick, he was caring for the poor, he was preaching to people, right? He was preaching people his truth, and he got tortured unjustly, and he was able to resurrect, right? Resurrect, and he was able to go to heaven, become the Holy Spirit, and become an inspiration for people for generations to come. And so the Christian story, right? There's no analog, there's no comparison when it comes to just the narrative, the meta narrative impact and salience, right? The narrative salience, the emotional effect of the story of Christ. It's incomparable. You can't compare it to anything else, right? So the motivational power of Christianity is A plus, right? It's great, very strong. The logical coherence, no. The logical coherence of Christianity doesn't make sense, because how can a mortal man be God, right? It doesn't make sense. You need to make the Trinitarian thesis, but the Trinitarian argument is incoherent. It's a square circle. It's a four-sided triangle. It's unintelligible. It's a contradiction. It's false, right? So it's false in logical terms. We cannot understand the Trinity, right? The Trinity is incoherent, right? So logical coherence cannot go to Christianity. Another issue is that the correct understanding of Christianity is actually Judaism, right? Because in Genesis, Hashem creates the entire universe, right? So Hashem is the creator of Jesus. Hashem is the God of Jesus, right? So Hashem is really the correct interpretation of Christianity is Judaism, right? So Jesus is an agent of Hashem. Jesus is the creation of Hashem, of the Jewish God, right? So really, the idea that Christ himself is sovereign as God, it actually doesn't make sense. It contradicts the Old Testament, right? How can the end of a story contradict the beginning of the story? It makes no sense. It's illogical. That's why Christianity is irrational. It's illogical. Yes, it has a very compelling story, perhaps the best hero myth around, perhaps the best moral meta-narrative around, right? But the story doesn't make sense. The Christ being God doesn't make any sense, because it's clearly stated that Hashem creates the entire universe. Therefore, Hashem must be God and not Jesus. Moreover, the Trinity doesn't make sense, right? So the correct interpretation of Christianity is actually Judaism, which is why people use the term Judeo-Christianity. But really, Christianity should be understood as a subset of Judaism, right? I think that's the correct way to understand Christianity. Explanatory power. Does religion provide a specific and compelling explanation of reality? I don't know about this for Christianity, right? Because the problem is the explanatory power of Christianity goes to Judaism, because Christianity is Judaism. So no, I'm not going to give Christianity the explanatory power, right? Universality. Can everyone participate in the religion? Yes, right? Everyone can participate in Christianity. Jesus says everyone is forgiven. Everyone can be a Christian. Everyone can follow me, right? Even though Christ himself wasn't a Christian, right? Christ himself might have even been a Muslim, right? So Christ himself probably wouldn't have even approved of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is killing people for no reason, burning people at the stake for no reason, engaging in crusades, all this violence, stealing money from people to be forgiven for their sins and go to heaven, right? Like, I don't know what that was called. Excuses? There's some word where that describes, like, basically you pay a Catholic priest and the Catholic priest, like, will let you enter into heaven, right? It's fraud, right? So, but Christ himself wasn't like that. So, and Christ himself said anyone can follow me, right? Even though Christ himself probably wouldn't even start Christianity, right? Christ himself wouldn't be in favor of these institutional churches, right? Think about it. Christ actively rebelled against institutions. He rebelled against the law. Christ rebelled against the legal authorities. He rebelled against the hypocritical scribes. Christ rebelled against the church, right? Christ was against the church. So Christ was not a Christian. Christ himself was just an individual hero. But so actually Christianity has diluted the message of Christ. Christianity has destroyed and ruined the image of Christ to fit their slave morality, right? Christianity is slave morality. Christ was an example of master morality, of overcoming the church authority and the authority of the state and saying, no, fuck all of you. I'm going to adhere to my truth, and I'm going to die on my beliefs, and I'm going to inspire so many people to worship a watered down religion, right? But anyways, yeah, so motivational power and universality goes to motivational power and universality definitely goes to Christianity in strong abundance, right? Now let's look at Islam. Islam definitely has strong motivational power, right? There is a jihadist element to Islam. What is jihad? It means holy war, right? It means you are willing to sacrifice your life for your God, right? That's very strong, right? That makes a religion very powerful, very compelling, right? When people are willing to die for their beliefs, that sign that the religion is very compelling, very strong, right? Logical coherence, yes. Islam has logical coherence because it doesn't run into the Trinity problem. It's definitely more, it seems more logical than any other religion because there doesn't seem to be any contradictions with like the core beliefs of Islam, right? So Islam is a very coherent religion. It's a monotheistic religion. It makes sense, right? So logical coherence goes to Islam. Explanatory power, yes. Just like Judaism, it does provide an explanation for the universe, right? That the Islamic God is the ultimate source of being, right? He is the uncontestable, the axiomatic, the necessary existence, and everything else is contingent and dependent on him, right? That's the explanation, and that has explanatory power. So yes. Universality. Can everyone participate in a religion? Yes. Everyone can be an Islamist, right? Everyone can be a Muslim if they engage in the prayers, go to a mosque, and do all these things, right? So Islam is open to all. Islam is a universal religion. So that's why I say Islam as an overall religion, right? From an overall religion perspective, Islam is better than any of the other monotheistic alternatives like Christianity and Judaism, right? The one criticism I'll have against Islam is that it is kind of a very submissive it's a submissive religion, right? It's a slave morality because the definition of Islam is submission, right? And they would say, okay, but it's submission to the highest principle. It's submission that gives you the most freedom because you're submitting to the most powerful God. I understand this, but the Islamic worldview of humans, right? How Islam views human power is very different from Christianity and Judaism, right? So in Judaism and in Christianity, the human, the individual, can actually wrestle with God, right? He can negotiate with God. He can wrestle with him, right? So in a way, it's like, oh, in Judaism and Christianity, a human is in some respects equal to God in power, right? He can actually fight God, right? He's actually like in some kind of entanglement and conflict with God, the human can stand his own, right? This is a much more optimistic view of humanity. This is much closer to master morality, right? Right, and so in this way, the how Judaism and Christianity views the human individual, views humans, it's more optimistic, and it's more like motivational in the individualist sense, right? Whereas with Islam, like if you say that the Islamic God, Allah, right? If you say that, oh, you can wrestle with Allah, you can actually conflict with Allah, you can actually have a genuine argument against Allah, right? You're not allowed, right? They would think this is disrespectful, this is impermissible, right? Probably, right? They would say, no, this is contradictory to the doctrine, right? So you can wrestle with Hashem, right? You could wrestle with the God of Judaism. You can't do this with the God of Islam, right? So it's a less optimistic view of humanity. So that's the one criticism I have of Islam. And so, okay, let's look at secular democracy, right? Secular democracy, aka leftist Trinitarianism. What is the leftist trinity? The leftist trinity is egalitarianism, moral universalism, and democracy, right? And so let's evaluate it in motivational power. Does the secular democracy have motivational power? Very little, right? So in itself, no, I'm not going to give it this. Does it have logical coherence? No. Egalitarianism is a self-contradicting principle. If you are a true egalitarian, then you do not prefer egalitarianism over its opposite, right? How can you be in favor of egalitarianism if you are against hierarchy, right? To say that egalitarianism is preferable to hierarchy is to promote a hierarchy. Therefore, to promote egalitarianism is a performative contradiction, so it's not logically coherent. Explanatory power. Does the religion provide a specific and compelling explanation of reality? Well, in the secular democratic religion, yes, okay, I guess they have the Big Bang, they have the theory of evolution, right? They have these secular theories of existence. The problem is they don't have causative explanations. Yes, you have the Big Bang. So what causes the Big Bang? How does the Big Bang become reality as we know it? How does the Big Bang become the specified form of the universe as it is, right? And let's say there's natural selection, there's Darwinian selection, there's evolution, right? But what causes evolution, right? Is there intelligent designer or not, right? Is there intelligent designer or not? So does secular democracy have explanatory power? No. Does secular democracy have universality? Yes. Yes, that's why that is all secular democracy has, right? Secular democracy has very strong universality because it's egalitarian, putatively, right? It has moral universalism, it has democracy, right? So secular democracy is very universal. Everyone can participate in the secular democratic religion, right? So, this is actually a bad thing. The downfall, right? The con, right? So the downside of the secular democratic religion is that it is very universalistic, because the problem is that because of the axiom of egalitarianism, right? The axiom of egalitarianism implies maximal inclusivity, right? And it also implies no individual variance, right? So because of the axiom of egalitarianism in the secular democracy, in the secular trinity, because of egalitarianism, you need to have maximal inclusivity, right? Maximal inclusivity. You also can't have individual uniqueness, right? So if you support egalitarianism, every individual, you have to get rid of all individual uniqueness. You have to flatten every individual into the same hive mind, right? So you need to put all humans into one hive mind so that everyone can be in unison, right? Because the problem is, if there's individual variance, if people are different from each other, this contradicts the axiom of egalitarianism, so you can't have it, right? And so you have to put everyone into one hive mind. Everyone needs to be a slave of the collective, right? You need to include everyone in the same collective, right? Because of moral universalism, which means everyone has to be a slave, right? So everyone needs to be part of the same hive mind, meaning that everyone has to act in unison. All the brains need to come together and become one mega brain, right? So so the leftist morality is hive mind morality. The leftist secular trinity is hive mind, herd morality, right? And so everyone needs to be in a hive mind. So what happens in the hive mind is that everyone's got to be in a hive mind. Everyone's going to be subordinate to the least intelligent member of the hive mind, right? Because of the principle of maximal inclusivity, everyone must become less intelligent. So everyone's intelligence and capacity for original thought and ability to be creative and their individual unique personality, all of that has to be destroyed and discarded, so that everyone becomes equivalent to their lowest common denominator, right? What does this mean? So within the hive mind, there's a least intelligent member. This is the member that is the most stupid and the least capable, right? And he is going to be the supreme leader of the hive mind, because it's impossible to make him as intelligent as the most intelligent member of the hive mind. Right? It's impossible to make the retard into a genius. It's impossible to cause the most stupid person to become the most intelligent person in the group. However, it is possible to make the most intelligent person in the group the most stupid. It is possible to reduce the intelligence of the most intelligent person so that he is stupid. So because everyone's intelligence, everyone's capacity, everyone's competence can be reduced to the lowest level possible, that will be the status quo. So then the least intelligent member of the hive mind will be the supreme leader, and everyone will bow down to him, right? So basically, the hive mind metanarrative is what subconsciously determines the leftist trinity, the leftist Trinitarian worldview, right? And so with the hive mind meta-narrative, basically it makes secular democracy, it makes the religion of secular reason, it makes the religion entirely a shell, a passive shell for other religious interests, right? So really, as a religion, the secular democracy is a nothing burger. It's passive, it's weak, because it really has nothing to offer, right? It's entirely passive, because all they have to offer is that, okay, we're going to make ourselves more stupid so that we can submit to the demands of the least intelligent member of the group, right? Because we need to include him, right? Because the least intelligent member of the hive mind must be the supreme leader of all the members of the hive mind. Therefore, really, the secular democracy, right, in practice, the secular democratic religion is weak, impotent, and is purely just a passive substrate, a passive shell for other religions to take over, right? So other powerful forces are just going to use secular democracy as a means for their own interest, right? So, yeah, so there we go. So those are the fundamental religions that determine perceived reality as we know it. Right. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'm on to the next one.